Long before tears became Ngozi's daily companion, her life was once filled with laughter and hope. She met Chinedu in her early youth, when dreams were still pure and the future felt wide open. They were not rich, but they were content. Chinedu was hardworking and charming, the kind of man who spoke gently and promised forever with confidence. Ngozi loved him deeply, not because he was perfect, but because he made her feel safe. They dated for many years, walking through dusty streets hand in hand, sharing plans about marriage, children, and the kind of home they would build together. People admired them, calling them a perfect match, and even elders spoke blessings over their relationship. When Chinedu finally decided it was time to marry, Ngozi cried tears of joy. The wedding was celebrated with joy and dancing, and when she entered her husband's house, her heart was full of determination. She promised herself she would be a good wife, respectful, peaceful, and patient. The first years of marriage were beautiful. They prayed together, ate together, laughed together, and even when pregnancy did not come immediately, they encouraged each other. Ngozi believed strongly that God's time was the best, and Chinedu agreed, at least in the beginning. But hidden beneath that happiness was a silent observer. Mama Uju, Chinedu's mother, watched everything. She smiled on the outside, but inside her heart lived bitterness. She was a woman who hated peace, a woman who believed control was power. She had ruled her son's life since childhood, and marriage did not change that. From the moment Ngozi stepped into the house, Mama Uju saw her not as a daughter, but as a threat. As months turned into years without a child, Mama Uju's patience vanished. At first, her words were subtle, disguised as jokes and careless comments. She would compare Ngozi to other women who already had children, laughing loudly, while Ngozi forced a smile and swallowed the pain. Slowly, the comments became insults. Mama Uju began calling her barren, reminding her daily that a woman without a child was useless in marriage. She told her son that Ngozi was wasting his future and that her womb was dead. Ngozi endured everything in silence. She woke up early every morning, cooked, cleaned, and served her husband and mother-in-law with respect. She never answered back, never raised her voice, believing that humility would save her marriage. At night, she cried quietly, praying for God to remember her. She visited churches, fasted, and believed with all her heart that her tears would not be in vain. Chinedu slowly changed. The man who once defended her began to listen more to his mother. Whatever Mama Uju said became truth in his ears. If she accused Ngozi, he believed it. If she insulted her, he stayed silent. Mama Uju reminded him constantly that she had another woman ready for him, a woman who would give him many children. These words planted seeds of doubt and cruelty in Chinedu's heart, and the love he once had for Ngozi began to fade. 8 long years passed without a child, and Ngozi's life became a daily struggle for survival. Visitors came and went, and Mama Uju never missed an opportunity to disgrace her. She insulted her openly, called her cursed, and blamed her for everything that went wrong in the house. Ngozi became thin and quiet, walking carefully around her own home like a stranger. Still, she stayed, because she believed marriage was for better or worse, and she hoped God would speak for her one day. Chinedu was no longer the man she married. He became harsh, easily angered, and emotionally distant. He stopped touching her, stopped comforting her, and began treating her like a burden. Mama Uju's voice controlled the house completely, and Ngozi's existence felt invisible. Yet, unknown to everyone, God was quietly preparing a surprise, one that would come at the most painful moment of all. The day Ngozi was chased out did not begin as a day of disaster. She woke up early, as usual, cooked breakfast, and carried out her duties quietly, avoiding Mama Uju's sharp eyes and bitter tongue. Later in the day, she went out to buy foodstuffs from the market, determined to return early and avoid trouble. But fate had other plans. Traffic locked the road for hours, horns blaring, tempers flaring, and the sun slowly sinking as Ngozi sat helplessly in a bus, clutching her small bag and praying silently that nothing would happen at home. By the time she arrived, darkness had covered the compound. Before she could even greet anyone, Mama Uju's voice cut through the night like a whip. Accusations poured out without mercy. She called Ngozi irresponsible, shameless, and stubborn, claiming she was roaming around like a woman with no husband. Ngozi tried to explain, her voice shaking as she spoke about the traffic, but Mama Uju would not listen. Chinedu stood there, watching, his face hard and unreadable, and for the first time, Ngozi felt fear of the man she married. Suddenly, Mama Uju grabbed Ngozi's bag and threw it outside. The sound of it hitting the ground echoed loudly in the compound. Chinedu spoke next, his voice cold and final, telling her to leave the house immediately. Those words pierced Ngozi's heart like a knife. She begged, she knelt, she cried, but mercy was nowhere to be found. The gate slammed shut behind her, and as she stood there in the darkness, her legs trembling, Ngozi realized she no longer had a home. That night, she walked aimlessly until she found an uncompleted building. The cold floor became her bed, and the open sky her roof. Tears soaked her wrapper as she whispered prayers, asking God why her life had turned into a nightmare. She did not know that even in that moment of rejection, a miracle had already begun inside her body. The days that followed were some of the hardest Ngozi had ever known. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and cold nights weakened her already fragile body. She became feverish, her strength fading quickly as she lay helpless in the abandoned building. People passed by daily, some staring, others pretending not to see her. She had no phone, no money, and no family nearby to run to. Each night, she prayed not to die alone in that place. One afternoon, her body finally gave up. She collapsed outside the building, barely conscious. A few kind-hearted passers-by noticed her condition and gathered around her. They were strangers, yet they showed her the compassion her own family denied her. They carried her to a nearby hospital, paid for her treatment, and stayed until she was stable. Their kindness restored a small piece of her broken faith in humanity. At the hospital, as Ngozi lay weak on the bed, the doctor returned with test results. The words that followed shook her entire world. She was pregnant, only a few weeks gone. For a long moment, she could not speak. Tears rolled down her face as she placed her hand on her stomach. After 8 years of insults, prayers, and humiliation, life had finally answered her. Joy and pain collided in her heart, because the child she begged God for came at the moment she was rejected. She cried uncontrollably, whispering to the unborn child that they would survive together. She thought of Chinedu, of Mama Uju, of the home she was chased from, and her heart ached deeply. Far away, Chinedu slept peacefully, unaware that his blood now flowed in the womb of the woman he abandoned. After her recovery, Ngozi had nowhere to go. The kind strangers helped her find a small place to stay and gave her little money to survive. Though her life was still uncertain, something inside her had changed. She was no longer living only for herself. She had a child to protect, a life that depended on her strength. Each morning, she spoke to her womb, promising that no matter how hard things became, she would not give up. As weeks passed, her pregnancy became more real, and her faith grew stronger. She found small jobs, endured hunger, and faced every day with quiet determination. She kept her pregnancy a secret from Chinedu and his family, choosing peace over confrontation. But destiny was already at work. The same people who mocked and rejected her would soon hear news that would shake them to their core. And as Ngozi slowly rose from pain, karma began to stir in the house she was chased from, waiting patiently for the right moment to strike. Not long after Ngozi disappeared from Chinedu's life, the house that once echoed with insults became strangely quiet. Mama Uju thought she had won. She moved around with pride, telling neighbors that she had finally driven out a useless woman. She began searching for another wife for her son, boasting about a young woman who would soon enter the house and give Chinedu many children. Chinedu pretended to be strong, but at night, sleep refused to come easily. The house felt empty in a way he could not explain, and the silence reminded him of the woman who once brought warmth into his life. As days passed, small problems began to arise. Chinedu's business started failing unexpectedly. Customers disappeared, deals collapsed, and money stopped flowing. Mama Uju blamed everyone except herself, accusing neighbors of jealousy and enemies of witchcraft. Yet the more she spoke, the worse things became. Arguments filled the house daily, and the peace she claimed Ngozi destroyed was nowhere to be found. Slowly, Chinedu began to realize that the calm he once had left with the woman he chased away. Far away, Ngozi's pregnancy advanced quietly. Her body changed, and the sickness came and went, but she endured it all with courage. She woke up every morning before sunrise to do small jobs, washing clothes, cleaning houses, and selling little items just to survive. People around her admired her strength, unaware of the deep wounds she carried inside. At night, she spoke softly to her unborn child, telling stories of hope, promising a future better than her past. There were moments when loneliness overwhelmed her, moments when she wondered if she should tell Chinedu about the child. But each time she remembered how he watched silently as she was chased out, her heart hardened. She chose dignity over begging. She trusted that God, who allowed her to conceive, would also protect her and her child. Though life was hard, her spirit refused to break. One evening, news reached Chinedu that shook him deeply. A neighbor mentioned seeing Ngozi weeks earlier, looking thin but alive. Something stirred inside him, a mix of relief and guilt. That night, memories flooded his mind, her kindness, her patience, her tears. For the first time, he questioned his obedience to his mother. Mama Uju dismissed his thoughts, calling Ngozi cursed and reminding him she was useless. But her words no longer carried the same power. Regret began to eat Chinedu slowly. His business continued to fail, and sickness crept into his body. Mama Uju also fell ill, her strength fading, and the woman she planned to replace Ngozi with suddenly refused the marriage. One by one, their plans collapsed. Chinedu realized too late that the woman he chased away was the pillar holding his life together. But destiny had moved on, and karma was no longer sleeping. Ngozi's life after the hospital was not a miracle story filled with sudden wealth or comfort. It was a story of survival, told in quiet suffering and small victories. She lived in a tiny room behind an old woman's house, a place so small that when she stretched her legs, her feet touched the wall. Each morning, she woke before the sun, her back aching, her body heavy with pregnancy. She would sit for a long moment, holding her stomach, whispering prayers, asking God to let her live long enough to deliver her child safely. The sickness of pregnancy was worse because of hunger. Some days, all she had was Gary soaked in water. Other days, she depended on the kindness of neighbors who noticed her condition and offered small help. Even in her weakness, Ngozi never complained. She worked wherever she could, washing clothes, cleaning compounds, helping traders in the market, enduring insults and exhaustion just to earn enough to eat. At night, when her body could no longer move, she lay awake, thinking of how her life changed so quickly, how love turned into rejection, and how her womb finally opened when her home closed its doors. There were nights she cried until sleep took her. Nights she remembered Chinedu's laughter, the way he used to call her name softly, the way they once planned their future. Those memories hurt more than hunger. Yet, each time despair tried to swallow her, the gentle movement in her womb reminded her that she was no longer alone. That child became her strength, her reason to wake up again. Back in Chinedu's house, nothing worked anymore. Mama Uju's voice still ruled, but its power was fading. The woman she wanted to bring in as a new wife suddenly disappeared, refusing to marry into a house filled with anger and bad stories. Neighbors whispered. Some shook their heads whenever Mama Uju passed. The same mouth that once mocked Ngozi now complained endlessly about misfortune. Chinedu's business collapsed completely. Goods spoiled, debts increased, and shame followed him everywhere. The respect he once enjoyed vanished, and people avoided him. At night, he sat alone, staring into space, haunted by images of Ngozi kneeling and begging on the day she was chased out. Sleep abandoned him. Even when he closed his eyes, his conscience remained awake. Mama Uju also began to suffer strange illnesses. Doctors found nothing serious, yet she grew weaker by the day. She complained of pains that moved from one part of her body to another. The same woman who once shouted endlessly now lay quietly on her mat, groaning. Chinedu watched his mother and felt fear for the first time. Deep inside him, a question he had avoided began to rise. What if they were wrong? One afternoon at the market, Chinedu overheard women talking. They spoke of a pregnant woman who worked tirelessly despite her condition, a woman abandoned by her husband. As he listened, his heart began to race. The description sounded painfully familiar. He wanted to ask questions, but fear held his tongue. That night, he could not eat. He paced around the house, his mind restless, his soul heavy. Days later, confirmation came. A distant relative mentioned seeing Ngozi, heavily pregnant, struggling to survive alone. The words hit Chinedu like thunder. Pregnant. The word echoed in his head again and again. He felt weak. He sat down slowly, his hands shaking. For years, he believed she was barren. For years, he allowed his mother to poison his heart. And now, the child he prayed for was growing somewhere without him. When Mama Uju heard the news, she screamed and denied it. She cursed Ngozi, accused her of immorality, and refused to accept the truth. But fear had already entered her heart. That night, she could not sleep. The dreams that came were dark and troubling, filled with cries of children and shadows chasing her. Karma had begun to speak, softly but clearly. As Ngozi's belly grew, so did her courage. She stopped hiding. She walked with her head held high, no longer ashamed of her story. Women around her admired her resilience. Some asked questions, and when she spoke, her voice carried pain but also strength. She no longer prayed for revenge. She prayed for protection, for provision, and for peace. One night, as rain poured heavily, Ngozi went into early labor pains. Fear gripped her heart, but she held on. Neighbors rushed her to the hospital, surrounding her with support she never expected. As she lay there, crying and sweating, she whispered to her child that no matter what happened, they would survive together. Her tears fell, but this time they were mixed with hope. Far away, Chinedu woke suddenly from sleep, his heart pounding for reasons he could not explain. Mama Uju screamed from her room, complaining of unbearable pain. The house was in chaos. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, as if the earth itself was reacting to the turning of fate. The labor pains came like waves, steady and unforgiving, but Ngozi welcomed them with clenched teeth and whispered prayers. She had imagined this moment many times, alone, afraid, unsure, but when it finally arrived, something stronger than fear rose inside her. The women around her held her hands, encouraged her, and reminded her to breathe. For the first time in many years, Ngozi did not feel abandoned. The room echoed with effort, sweat, and determination, and when the cry of a newborn finally filled the air, her tears flowed freely, not from pain but from relief. The nurse placed the baby gently beside her, and Ngozi stared in disbelief. After years of insults and mockery, after being called barren and useless, she was now a mother. She held her child close, her heart overflowing with emotions words could not contain. She named him Ifechukwu, meaning God's will, because his life was proof that heaven had never forgotten her. As she kissed his tiny forehead, she made a silent promise that no matter how hard life became, her child would never feel unwanted. Outside the hospital walls, rain poured heavily, as if the sky itself was cleansing old wounds. That same night, far away, Chinedu tossed restlessly on his bed. His chest felt tight, his mind clouded by strange unease. Mama Uju cried out in her sleep, waking up screaming from a dream she could not explain. The cry of a newborn had been heard, even if they did not yet know it. Life after childbirth was not easy. Ngozi's body was weak, and money was scarce, but her spirit was unbreakable. She carried Ifechukwu on her back as she worked, humming soft songs while tears sometimes slipped down her cheeks. People admired her strength. Some offered help, others offered words of encouragement, and slowly, her story spread. Women whispered about the abandoned wife who gave birth alone and still stood tall. As months passed, Ifechukwu grew healthy and bright. His laughter brought light into Ngozi's life, healing wounds she thought would never close. Each milestone, his first smile, his first steps, felt like a victory over the pain of her past. Ngozi no longer lived in fear. She had found purpose in motherhood, and that purpose gave her courage. Meanwhile, Chinedu's life continued to unravel. Debts piled up. Friends disappeared. The respect he once commanded vanished like smoke. He grew thin and restless, haunted by the thought of a child growing somewhere without his knowledge. Mama Uju's illness worsened. The strong woman who once ruled the house now depended on others for help. The same mouth that cursed now begged for relief. One afternoon, fate finally brought the truth face to face with Chinedu. He saw Ngozi from a distance at the market, carrying a child on her back. The world around him stopped. His legs felt weak, and his heart pounded loudly in his ears. The child looked familiar, the shape of the face, the eyes, the calm strength. There was no doubt left. That was his son. Chinedu followed quietly, shame burning inside him. He watched Ngozi interact with people, saw the respect she earned, saw the dignity she carried despite everything. When she noticed him, her face remained calm. There was no anger, no bitterness, only distance. Chinedu knelt before her in public, tears streaming down his face as he begged for forgiveness, confessing his weakness and his mistakes. Ngozi listened silently. Every insult, every tear, every night on cold floors flashed through her mind. She looked at her son, then back at Chinedu, and spoke calmly. She told him forgiveness was possible, but consequences could not be erased. Trust, once broken, takes time to heal, and some wounds leave permanent scars. Chinedu wept openly, realizing too late the cost of blind obedience. When Mama Uju heard the truth, her strength finally left her. She cried bitterly, confessing her cruelty, admitting her hatred destroyed her own household. She begged Ngozi for mercy, her voice trembling with regret. But life does not rewind easily. Her health continued to fail, and the respect she once commanded never returned. Ngozi did not celebrate their suffering. Instead, she focused on raising her child with love and wisdom. She moved forward, built a new life, and found peace within herself. Chinedu remained in her life only as a reminder of lessons learned the hard way. The village would later tell the story as a warning, a tale of a woman chased away in shame, who returned as a mother of honor. A story that taught that cruelty plants seeds of sorrow, and patience, though wounded, will always bear fruit in time. News travels fast in African communities, especially stories soaked in pain and truth. It did not take long before whispers about Ngozi spread through the village like harmattan fire. People talked about the woman who was chased out for being barren and later gave birth to a healthy son. Elders shook their heads in disbelief. Women gathered in groups, discussing how patience had spoken louder than cruelty. Slowly, the same mouths that once mocked Ngozi began to defend her. The village elders called for a meeting. They summoned Chinedu and Mama Uju to appear before them. On the day of the gathering, the atmosphere was heavy. Ngozi arrived quietly, carrying Ifechukwu on her back. She did not raise her head proudly, nor did she come in anger. She came with dignity. When people saw her, many lowered their eyes in shame. They saw strength, not weakness, and honor, not disgrace. One by one, the elders spoke. They reminded the people that marriage was sacred, that no woman should be treated as less than human because of delayed childbirth. They condemned the act of chasing a wife out without proof or mercy. Each word fell heavily on Chinedu's heart. Mama Uju could not lift her head. For the first time in her life, she was silenced by truth. Mama Uju's body was present, but her spirit was crushed. When she was asked to speak, her voice trembled. She confessed openly that she hated Ngozi without cause. She admitted she enjoyed causing trouble and believed control gave her power. As she spoke, tears flowed freely. The elders listened quietly, not interrupting, allowing shame to do its work. She turned to Ngozi and begged publicly for forgiveness. She said she destroyed her own home with her tongue. But forgiveness does not always restore what was lost. The elders ruled that Mama Uju would live with the weight of her actions. Respect once lost could not be demanded again. Her authority in the family was taken from her, and she was warned never to interfere in another marriage again. From that day, Mama Uju became a shadow of her former self. The woman who once loved quarrels now lived quietly, her voice low, her eyes filled with regret. Karma did not kill her. It humbled her, which was a deeper punishment. Chinedu stood before the elders with tears in his eyes. He admitted his greatest mistake was choosing blind obedience over wisdom. He confessed that he failed to protect his wife and abandoned her when she needed him most. The elders rebuked him strongly. They told him a man who cannot stand for justice in his own home is not yet a man. As punishment, Chinedu was ordered to take responsibility for his child fully, whether or not Ngozi chose to return to him. He accepted the ruling without argument. His pride was gone. He knew that even if Ngozi forgave him, the love they once shared could never return to its original form. From that day, Chinedu changed. He became quiet, respectful, and remorseful. He helped provide for Ifechukwu and tried to be present, but he never forced himself into Ngozi's life again. Karma taught him patience through loss. Ngozi listened to everything quietly. When asked to speak, she thanked the elders calmly. She said she no longer carried bitterness in her heart, but she had learned the value of peace. She chose not to return to the marriage. Her decision shocked many, but the elders respected it. They saw wisdom in her choice. Ngozi focused on raising Ifechukwu with love and truth. She built a small business and slowly found stability. Her life was no longer ruled by fear or insults. She walked with confidence, not because she won, but because she survived. Women looked up to her as a symbol of endurance and grace. Ifechukwu grew into a bright and joyful child, surrounded by love and protection. He never lacked care, and he never felt unwanted. Ngozi made sure of that. Years later, elders would tell this story to young brides and grooms. They spoke of Ngozi, the woman called barren who gave birth after being chased away. They spoke of Mama Uju, whose love for quarrel destroyed her authority. They spoke of Chinedu, who lost his peace because he refused to stand up for truth. The story became a warning passed from generation to generation. It taught that patience is not weakness, that cruelty always returns to its sender, and that God's timing cannot be mocked. Above all, it taught that karma does not rush, but it never forgets. And so, the tale ended not with revenge, but with justice, dignity, and a lesson carved deeply into the hearts of those who heard it. By the time Ngozi walked through the village with Ifechukwu on her back, people could not stop whispering. Mothers shook their heads, children pointed, and even the market traders paused their business to look. "See that woman," one said, "the one they called barren. She walks as if nothing can touch her." Another shook her head and muttered, "It is true that the hand of God never fails." The elders watched quietly from their shaded verandas, nodding in approval, pleased that justice had finally found its way. Ngozi ignored the whispers, but her heart felt light. She had been through storms stronger than most could imagine, yet here she was, walking tall. Ifechukwu giggled, reaching out to touch flowers along the roadside. "See, mother, see," he said innocently, unaware of the weight of his own story. Ngozi laughed softly, tears threatening her eyes, and thought, "The child I waited for in sorrow is now my joy and freedom." Chinedu followed discreetly, staying a distance behind. He watched Ngozi with a mixture of awe and regret. She carried herself with a dignity he could never reclaim. Every laugh, every gesture, every tender look at her child reminded him of the mistakes he had made. The villagers noticed his presence. "See that man," one whispered. "He was proud once, now humbled by what he could not control." Inside her once dominant home, Mama Uju had become a shadow. Her own people avoided her, speaking softly whenever she entered a room. The same tongue that spread venom now stammered when confronted with truth. Her neighbors spoke cautiously, and even her friends no longer trusted her. The elders reminded her constantly, "Your words can wound, but they also return like arrows to your own breast." One morning, she went to the market and tried to assert herself, but everyone whispered behind her back. She overheard someone say, "Do not speak too much. She who curses others now lives under her own curse." Mama Uju's hands trembled. Her pride, once untouchable, was broken. The house felt empty. She realized too late that a home built on fear and cruelty could never be truly hers. Chinedu could no longer ignore his mistakes. He tried to provide for his child, but Ngozi's refusal to return reminded him daily that love cannot be forced. He began to work quietly, helping neighbors and doing what he could for Ifechukwu from a respectful distance. Each day was a lesson in humility. At night, he would sit outside, staring at the stars, thinking about the woman he abandoned, the mother of his child who survived storms he could not endure. The elders advised him with African proverbs, "He who does not care for his own will soon be cared for by the one he wronged." The words sank deep. Chinedu realized that obedience without discernment, blind loyalty to Mama Uju, and lack of courage had cost him his peace, his marriage, and the early years of his child's life. Ngozi's days became filled with work, laughter, and hope. She started a small weaving business and sold beautiful baskets and mats in the market. Women sought her advice and admired her resilience. Each basket she wove became a symbol of patience, strength, and survival. Her story inspired even young girls who faced cruelty in their own homes, showing them that dignity and perseverance could outlast even the harshest insults. Ifechukwu became the pride of the village. He learned quickly, curious and bright. Ngozi taught him not just to read and write, but to carry himself with respect, to help others, and to never forget the lessons of patience and resilience. She told him, "No one can steal your dignity, my son, unless you give it to them." He listened intently, his small hands gripping hers, eyes wide with understanding beyond his years. Years passed. Mama Uju's health continued to decline, and Chinedu, though repentant, remained a humble man, forever aware of the cost of his blind obedience. Ngozi's life, once filled with despair, now overflowed with hope. Her story became part of the village's oral tradition, repeated at gatherings, in markets, under the trees, and around fires. Never mock a woman's womb or her patience, for the earth sees all, and the heavens answer in time. Even Chinedu admitted to the elders that Ngozi's rise was a lesson he could not forget. "She is stronger than I could ever imagine," he confessed, his voice heavy with humility. "I lost my place in her life, and it is right. I now see that strength, patience, and faith are worth more than wealth or obedience to cruelty." Ifechukwu grew into a curious and lively boy. Every morning, he ran barefoot across the dusty paths of the village, his laughter ringing through the air. People remembered Ngozi as the woman abandoned, but they now saw her son as a bright spark of hope. He reminded everyone of the power of patience, endurance, and God's timing. Ngozi watched him with pride, sometimes tearing silently, remembering how she held him as a newborn, wondering if she could survive the storms to raise him. She told him stories of his early life, of the day he was born amidst hardship, and how people once mocked his mother. "Never forget, my son," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Your life is proof that cruelty cannot destroy patience. Even in the darkest nights, God shines." Ifechukwu listened closely, his young eyes reflecting determination beyond his years. Chinedu sometimes watched from a distance, amazed at his son's energy and intelligence. Guilt weighed heavily on him. He had lost the earliest years of Ifechukwu's life, years that could never return. Yet he quietly helped Ngozi whenever she allowed it, bringing small gifts or money for school, careful not to overstep. The villagers began to admire Ngozi not only for her survival, but for raising a son who embodied wisdom and respect. Mothers whispered, "See what patience can do." Even when rejected, life still finds a way to honor the righteous. Children played near Ifechukwu, treating him as a young leader, unaware of the battles his mother had endured for him. Ngozi began teaching him simple skills for life: weaving, storytelling, and respect for elders. Every lesson carried the weight of her own suffering and the wisdom she had gathered. Ifechukwu's laughter became a symbol, echoing through the village as proof that perseverance is stronger than cruelty. Mama Uju, once feared and respected, was now avoided by the entire community. Her health had deteriorated, and the anger she once carried now turned inward, consuming her. She often sat by the fire alone, mumbling curses she could no longer send out. Her house felt heavy and cold, even under the scorching sun. Neighbors who once sought her favor now crossed the street to avoid her. The same children she once scolded now stared openly, whispering about her downfall. One evening, the elders called her to a meeting. They reminded her of the damage her words caused, not only to Ngozi but to her own son and family. "A home built on quarrels will crumble under its own weight," one elder said firmly. Mama Uju lowered her head, tears streaming. She begged for forgiveness, but even the elders reminded her, some consequences cannot be erased. She could seek peace now, but the trust and power she lost would never return. Her illness worsened, and Chinedu stayed by her side reluctantly. He had learned humility. Every time she complained, he remembered the day Ngozi was chased out. He had once obeyed blindly, and now he knew better. Mama Uju's bitterness faded slowly, leaving only regret. Her life became quiet, shadowed by the knowledge that her cruelty had destroyed her authority and fractured her family forever. The village spoke often of her as a warning. Mothers would tell their daughters, "See what happens to a woman who chooses hatred over patience." Children repeated it as a story of karma, and the memory of Mama Uju's tyranny became part of the oral history of the village. Even though she lived longer than some expected, her last days were silent and humble, her once powerful voice replaced with whispers of regret, a shadow of the woman she had been. Chinedu did not regain Ngozi's love as it once was, but he began to understand respect and responsibility. Every morning, he rose early to work, not for pride, but to provide quietly for his son. When he walked through the village, he no longer boasted or demanded attention. Instead, he nodded quietly to neighbors and helped whenever possible, building a reputation of a man who had learned from his mistakes. He would sometimes sit by Ngozi's home, watching Ifechukwu play, and think of the past. I destroyed peace in my own house, he whispered to himself. I chased love away, and now I live with the memory of what I lost. Humility became his constant companion. The elders told him, a man who humbles himself before life's lessons becomes stronger than the one who rules with arrogance. He occasionally brought gifts for Ngozi, small things like cloth for her business or food for her household. Ngozi accepted them, not out of kindness alone, but because she valued the lesson her son needed to see. A father can provide without demanding power. This quiet cooperation became a model for other men in the village. Though he could never undo the past, Chinedu's life became a living lesson for others, that obedience without discernment and cruelty disguised as tradition could destroy a family, and only humility and genuine repentance could restore some balance. Please subscribe, share, like, and comment for more videos.